welcome everyone. Welcome to today's webinar for business owners and friends. My name's Rob Douglas. I'm the Executive Director of Australian Owner Manager. We've put together this webinar series to provide business owners with really short, sharp, practical advice on topics that come to the fore during these challenging times that we're all getting used to. And so today we're joined by Shirley Smith from SAS Change Management. Shirley is a presenter and facilitator on the Owner Manager program. She has a background in psychology. She's been a general manager and an HR director for many national firms, both in the tourism and hospitality sector for many years, and she's also been a consultant helping organisations with both communication, staff management, performance, and those types of things for the last 20 years. So comes with a wealth of knowledge. So I'm going to turn over now to Shirley, and we're going to be about half an hour on the webinar. There'll be time for questions. So if you want to ask a question, use the Q&A option within the webinar. We'll monitor that. And then there'll be some time at the end also if people want to stay on and ask some specific questions in terms of their situation. But over to you, Shirley.
Thanks, Rob, very much. And thanks everyone for joining us on these important issues. How we relate to our teams and during this complex and challenging time will impact greatly with what talent we're able to retain at the conclusion of this crisis. So what I wanted to run through today was how do we communicate with people remotely and in those difficult conversations, which I'm sure you've probably already had quite a few of them, and there will be more to come. So I just wanted to run through some techniques we can use. My experience of working with businesses is that if we can keep it short and sharp and give them the tools, that's what they need at the moment, because there's an extremely large amount of information coming down the pipeline at them. So that's how we're going to try and proceed, if that's okay. I'll try and spend 15 minutes on some strategies on communication, and then 15 minutes on working from home. So I'm used to facilitating, so if I ask a question to the thin air and nobody answers, I'll understand that. One-way communication isn't usually my gig. SAS Change Management, the business that I have, the focus is we create momentum in the business through engaging the people to deliver on business goals. And that's the key piece I want to look at today, is how do we keep people engaged and how do we keep your stress levels down, because having to communicate all of the packages, the state of the business, how we're moving forward is always going to be a challenging process. You're probably trying to scoff a sandwich at the moment. So while you're doing that, I just want to flash this next slide up on the screen for a couple of seconds. Tell me what you see. Well, don't tell me what you see. Think about what it is you see. So some people will have seen Paris in the spring, and some people will have seen Paris in the spring. The purpose of the slide is that that's exactly what happens with communication at the moment. Different people will hear and see different things. You will find it very frustrating as people go through the amount of change that's occurring. That people will continually ask you the same question, because some people move through and adapt very easily and others take a lot longer. So it's not that they haven't listened, it's that they just didn't hear it because they were either freaking out, they only heard the first piece, not the second piece. So it will require a lot of patience. And as owner managers, we're usually pretty driven people. So patience may not be our first port of call, but that's what we'll require in this time. How do we have strong leadership in uncertain times? So in terms of the communication, if we can focus on what's in our control, try not to communicate on things that are outside our control, empathise and use objective language, use evidence and facts. So this just gives us a little bit of some tips. Ask about impact and benefit. Talk about the long-term future of the business so that there's hope for people. And this is the key, predictable communication regularly. So if you think about during the fire crisis, we had Shane, I think it's Fitzsimon. We knew he was going to be there every day giving us the information around the latest updates on what we should do. We know that the Prime Minister during this crisis will be there at a certain time every day telling us what we need to do. So it's that level of predictable communication that we need to provide to our businesses and teams. And that might be through team leaders as well. A little bit of a framework before we jump into one-to-one and group. So how I've structured it is, we've got the one-to-one communications, which are tough to have. And then there's the group communications where we might need to explain, for instance, a little bit around something that's happened recently, reduction in hours or one of the packages that's come out from the government. So this lends itself a little bit to the leadership piece we just covered, but regular communication, only deal in facts. Key thing, script to the bad news, don't do it on the fly. So my strong advice would be very few of us can deliver bad news well. It tends to come out how we didn't want it to. So please script it and then you'll be able to deliver it without reading it, Nelly. But if you script it first, deliver it yourself. Don't give it to someone else to deliver. Make sure the entire leadership team's on the same page. So they may not all agree with what decisions are made, but they need to be prepared to support them. Demonstrate empathy in each communication. So even though you've already done that, continue to demonstrate that empathy with each communication that you make. How you understand it's impacting families and so forth. For the working from home, empower people with control over their environment and decisions where possible. So micromanagement is out and trust is in. A lot of organisations have said previously, I don't want my people to work from home because I don't think we'll get the productivity or whatever it might be. That will lend itself probably to people wanting to micromanage or managers wanting to micromanage. That will just drive productivity down. So we're in a situation where they are working from home, so we'll need to trust and put frameworks around that work. And provide a long-term view where possible. So that's a little bit of the same. Rob mentioned to me that JobKeeper was something that people was coming up with team members at the moment, and that they were asking a lot of questions around that. In these uncertain times, deliver from a leadership perspective, do what you can, you deliver on certainty. So for instance, what can we be certain about? We can be certain that we need to check the criteria and that the business meets that criteria. So it might be if it's under $1 million, I think if it's under 50 million, you need to have, your revenue needs to have been impacted by 30% for a similar time last year, but that needs to be checked. So we need to check that the criteria is right, that we meet the criteria, and that we'll communicate tomorrow at 12 on a team call. So give that. The best certainty we can give is that communication around when we'll communicate with people. We can't give them certainty around a lot of things, but we can give them certainty around communication. And as you've seen, that's giving the Australian public a lot of confidence at the moment. How do we communicate on a one-to-one? So this is a technique, and as I said, you don't need to write it down. You'll be getting this in a format, probably via email, Rob, something like that. So on a one-to-one basis, if you can use these 4 steps, it gives you a template to go with. Emotional cushioning, what's that? What that does is that lets the person know this is going to be a difficult conversation. So this is a very difficult, I've actually scripted one through here so that there's an example. This is a very difficult conversation to have. That way they know at the outset to prepare for bad news. That's an important element. Otherwise they might be thinking we're going to talk about how much fun it is working from home. So it's very important to let them know it's going to be a tough conversation. Then don't hang them out to dry, get straight into it. Get the issue, table the issue straight away. It's with great regret that due to the impact of the coronavirus on revenues, we need to reduce the hours of the call centre by 50%. So get that fact out. That's the fact for the business. What will the individual be doing? They'll be going, what does this mean to me? So if we can straight away move to, this means from next week, your hours and pay will reduce by 50%. So include a time frame. This is important because the person has heard everything, and again, they will hear it in different ways, but they've got the information and the facts. If you try and dress it up, they'll lose the essence of the message. So it's better to just keep it factual. Then reiterate that the person is of value. However you want to position this. You are very valued and it's important to me that you're okay. Who have you got to discuss this with? So making sure they've got some support. And I will call you back tomorrow to discuss further. There are government packages we may be able to access. Okay, so however you want to dress that up, but it's important to make sure that they understand they're valued and that they're important. And then you can add on the long-term view. These are extraordinary times, but they will end, and I want you to be here with us as part of our team when business resumes. So then, ask questions or however you want to move forward. So that would then be confirmed in an email, just the pieces around what's going to happen to them in terms of time and their pay. So I hope that's helpful. The idea is to give you a template which you will customize for yourself, but this is what works from stepping people through the process from a perspective of where they're at in terms of the changes. So that's if it was on a one-to-one. There's not a lot of difference if it's on a group basis. I hope I'm not moving too fast through this. So on a group basis, we'd have additional context at the beginning. So the additional context, then we'd have the emotional cushioning, stating the facts. What does it mean to me? Empathy and value that the person has, long-term view, and then questions, because obviously in a group environment, you'd want to open up for questions. So on a group basis, now this is the ugly slide. This slide's got a lot of writing on it, but I constantly get asked, after training 3,000 managers and leaders, what I always get asked is, can you just put that in writing? So what I've done is written it up for you as an example. So I hope that's useful. So due to the additional context, due to the impact, I'm not going to go, I don't know that I'll go through this blow by blow, but due to the impact, blah, 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 we have had to make decisions to remain solvent and come out on the other side. Now, you may not want to say it exactly like that. That's the additional context. The emotional cushioning, these decisions have been very hard to make as a business owner, and it's very difficult to deliver this news to you. Then state the facts. As you are no doubt aware, we have a reduced workload as clients have put projects on hold to protect their own businesses. So explain how the effect that has occurred. And we now only have enough work to keep 6 people employed full time. What does this mean? What this means for each person on the team would have reduced hours to X amount per week, starting from next Monday. Always let them know what the date is that they're going to be starting from. As you're probably aware, all managers have been on reduced hours since Monday last week. So this is a key point. If we're asking the team to go on reduced hours, have a think about how that comes across if managers aren't already on reduced hours or reduced pay. That from a leading from the front perspective. Again, it is the long-term view, or empathy and value, sorry. So it is with a heavy heart that I deliver this news, as I value each person on the team and realise this will put additional financial pressure on families and loved ones. Really important that we make the case around including the families that people are now working and living at home. So their families have entered our business, if you like. And it's important that we acknowledge that on a lot of different levels. We will come through this, and it is the goal of this leadership team to ensure we continue to be the amazing collaborative team we have always been and manage through this with our team intact. You may or may not want to say it like that. Whatever suits your business, it allows for that long-term view, which is where the leadership can be strong. So that would be on a group basis. It just gives a little bit of a template and an example, and that if you structure it along those lines, the key thing is the emotional cushioning. The context lets them know why it's happening. The emotional cushioning recognises and gives them a heads up that this is going to be a tough discussion. Straight into, this is the fact of what's occurred, and then so how does that impact this individual and this team? Provide that empathy and value constantly around how you feel about the situation and how you value the individuals and the teams. Then create that long-term view, which is really where that leadership piece comes in. And then obviously in a group environment, there would be questions as well. So I'm thinking that I'll write on 12:15. So that's the having difficult discussions on the one-to-one and group basis. Hoping that's been helpful for people. Rob, were there any particular questions around that?
No, everyone mentioned it was a good pace and good content. So no specific questions at this stage, Shirley.
Oh, excellent. Thanks for that feedback. I'll kind of try to keep going at the same pace and content. So the next piece, I've been inundated with calls around this and around working from home. So I put together a little bit of a process. People will already have had some discussions. I think we've been at it for about a week, haven't we? Working from home. And maybe 2 for some people. This is a process for the leaders or the team leaders to take their teams through. So I've actually put together a handout that's got working from home, an ideas doc that you can send out prior to having a meeting. So I've written this as though your team or managers, team leaders or managers might be having this discussion with their teams. If they send out the doc first, then people have got something to think about and process before you actually have the meeting. And the meeting will obviously be over something like this, a webinar or something, a conference call. Then have a discussion with the team, agree on the parameters that the team's going to work to, implement those parameters, and then review and adjust on a weekly basis, because we won't necessarily get it right straight up. So if we go to, there's in that handout that would go out, if you want to use it, that can go out to the individual about working from home. In that, it takes them through some ideas around daily schedules, regular communication, staying on track and motivated. So there's lots of different ideas in there, and I'll take us through both of those scenarios now, but particularly starting with the team discussion and the setup for that. So in the document that would go out to people to set up the discussion, there would be what's suggested in there, and you can take things out. If we can send it out in Word so that people can change it if they want to. A home discussion with partner or family. As I mentioned before, we need to recognise that people's families, their partner, their children, and the dog are now part of our business. So that home discussion, they might need to talk with their partner, and it's broken down into lots of different key points. But things like maybe we have a quiet space in the house and we take turns at utilising that. If we've got 2 toddlers, they're going to need constant supervision. So maybe we have to have a strategy where one of us is in the quiet space for 2 hours and one of us is out on the, supervising and trying to do maybe less onerous tasks while we're supervising, that type of thing. So there's lots of different ideas in there for them to, as a family, actually organise themselves. And a lot of them will be partway down this track anyway. There's talk in there about the home office setup, the daily schedule. So, for instance, some of the key points in there are things like there needs to be a circuit breaker at the end of the day for most people. So what tends to happen is we finish work and now we're cooking dinner and having dinner. If there's no circuit breaker, what happens is work starts to even more so infiltrate our home life, and more than it already has. But the other side of that is our frustration. Say there's not that circuit breaker where we would have driven home, caught the train, and actually just desensitized ourselves to some of the things that had happened during the day and start to get focused on family. So it's really important from a psychological point of view to have a start to the day and have a finish to the day. So that daily schedule, having breaks, breaking things down into chunks, giving themselves rewards. So if they're an extrovert, saying things to them like, your reward when you've finished doing whichever chunk of work it is, this is what they would say to themselves, is that they get to call a friend and have a call, or they get to bring a, conference call a teammate or so, whatever it is. And for the introverts, and this is just going with 2 different styles, but for the introverts, sometimes they forget to give themselves a break. They just keep working. So it's important for them to realise they need to go and get some exercise and have a break as well. So that daily schedule, one of the things I'd like to reference as well is Toby said last week, Rob, on his video conference, that that was Dr. Toby, that one of the things people do is if you see little changes, it's important to recognise them, because we need to get people back to we need to assist people and ourselves to have our routines. So for instance, if you notice that, well, an example would be if you start having a drink every night when you never used to, or if you're not getting the exercise that you would normally do because the gym's shut or whatever. Getting back into those routines for ourselves, as well as encouraging people to get back into those routines, is really important. And noticing if they're not doing that is also key. And that could be that whether they're communicating with people. So that's the daily schedule. Regular communication, this is in the handout that goes to everybody. So it talks about regular communication, and it talks about how to stay on track and motivated. I'll move on from that. So then that goes out to the team. The discussion with the team that the team leader or manager might have would cover these topics and obviously more. A key thing is structure weekly team meetings or how we're going to catch up. In this environment, strongly suggest that it needs to be a conference call if you can, where you can see everybody. In the weekly meetings, just to give an example, you might want to talk about the week in review, maybe have a little bit of fun in the meeting, maybe have a couple of quiz questions, talk about people's goals for the week and how they went with it, get feedback. One of the important things for the leaders here is to ask lots of questions and do less of the talking. It's very important that the teams drive this. What we need to drive is any of the key messaging and important perhaps KPIs that might get missed, but generally people will come up with them if you ask the right question. So structure how the communication is going to happen. For instance, we're going to have one-to-ones with everybody every week. Then from so there's actually a whole handout on this with a lot more information. Communication. Ask the group what their ideas are when you're having this discussion with the team about how we now go forward and how we structure ourselves. What are their ideas? Would they like to have a morning chat, for instance, every morning to kick off work at 8:30 or 9 o'clock or whatever it might be? I have one group that it works remotely, and they have a morning chat every morning to kick work off at 8:45. The key thing there is it became a little bit boring, would be the way to put it. So, and there was lots of silences and things like that. So what they did, we got together and structured it in one of our quarterly get-togethers so that there was a different topic every day. And on one day it was just fun. So on one day there's a trivia quiz, which I'm really bad at, but it might be a music trivia or whatever. The other thing is to keep the social piece going. So obviously people, when they're at home, are not going to be running into people in the corridor or going for a walk at lunchtime and running into people at coffee shops. So setting up a communication for the team and they'll probably come up with it anyway, which is even better, but a social morning tea might be once a week and make it fun. And I would encourage people to think about whether or not they need to invite the other partner in the household to that social morning tea, maybe every second time, because again, they're part of our new workforce in a way, because they support the person who works for us. So those social morning teas, there'll be somebody in the group who gets on top of that and decides how to orchestrate that. That's very important because that's what's missing in the fabric of working from home. The other thing to remember when people are working from home, and I think we probably all agree with this, is that 6 hours solid work at home, uninterrupted, is at least worth 8 hours in the office. So think about what our expectations are around that as well. In terms of software, we definitely need some decent software that's collaborative. That makes life so much easier when people are working from home. So we don't have a whole lot of unstructured communication going, with email trails and things like that. The collaborative tools that I've suggested there are Trello and Planner. I'm not an expert on this in this space, but I asked Nash, who's one of the presenters on Australian Owner Manager, and he's definitely supported both of those. So Trello is really easy to use, but that way people can be communicating instantaneously using cards on Trello, and also you can have their goals, their KPIs on there. And you can, because they'll invite you in, you can see where they're up to. I'm sure everyone's probably across all this, but that's really important. One of the key pieces I wanted to mention was make sure the whole organisation's using the same one, so we don't end up with a whole lot of different pieces of software being used, because if we get to a point where different teams need to collaborate, it will be a lot easier if it's one platform. And how do we measure product? Yeah.
Shirley, there's a question that's just come through here that's pertinent to this,
Sure.
you know, this topic here. It's just around, you know, there's a lot of information coming down the pipe at the moment, suggesting that email communication is less effective. And what's your kind of suggestion around prioritising information due to information overload?
So I'm thinking that information would be from the business, that it would be emails from the business that we're talking about here, rather than information from the government or anything like that.
Well, I think the thing is everyone's getting a whole lot more emails at the moment, because it's the way people are communicating. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So if it's coming via email, I don't have any great suggestions there, other than, you know, you can prioritise and say, and pick who it's, you know, prioritise who things are from, and make sure they go into folders where you're going to be able to go to those first. So if it's from your manager, or if it's from, depending on what it is you're after, or from the team member, then that's going straight into folders, and you focus in those folders. But I would suggest getting, from the team perspective, getting onto the software collaborative packages. Does that?
Yeah, that sounds good. Thanks, Shirley.
Yeah. One of the things I do with this is a very personal thing. I highlight everything as though I'm going to dump it, and then I go through and only keep the ones that I want to respond to or that are relevant. This is but you'd probably do that after you've had that prioritized into the folders. How do we measure productivity? Ask the group, because nothing much has changed. It'll be around, what are the outcomes for that project for this week to stay on track, or what are the outcomes for that client, however it's managed, or what are the billable hours? Whatever those productivity measurements are, we will need to keep those. Ask the guys, just put it on the table and say to them, how do we want to measure this? So shall we, you know, will we have review billable hours, for instance, on say Wednesday, to make sure we're on track, because we're all in a new world. We need to make sure that we don't want to get to Friday and find out we haven't got enough, you know, because we're all trying to manage it differently. So, and definitely have it registered on the daily, weekly, or on Trello, however it's easiest to manage. So they would be some of the pieces of the discussion with the team. And again, that handout is quite a bit bigger than what's on here. Then you would go to the next stages, which are the working parameters. So once everyone's agreed, we're going to have a morning meeting, we're going to have a weekly meeting, our social one is this, our, you know, whatever it is, and the way we're going to track KPIs is this way. Once that's done, confirm it in dot points and send it back out to everybody, or put it on the Trello board, or the planner. And then implement. So follow up in one-to-ones, and that will be much more around asking the question. So what I've also included, and I'll send this, Australian Owner Manager can send this out in the package, is a page of open questions, or questions that can be used. So for instance, you know, how did you go with the billable hours yesterday? Or why do you think that happened? So rather than say, look, your billable hours were off track, what we want to do is give people some techniques to ask, to coach them basically. Because the danger is they're on their own, they're basically on their own at home. I mean, I know there's a partner there, but they probably won't be chatting about this particularly. In the workplace, if something was presented not very well, they'd have someone to go and talk to about it. At home, they really don't. So they churn it over, depending on their style, or they get annoyed, and then their productivity goes down, but also it affects their mindset and their mental health. So really important that we're able to help people solve their own problems and to engage them in the one-to-ones. So I've put a whole heap of questions down. It doesn't mean we don't give feedback. So for instance, it's key that we achieve productivity levels so we can maintain business continuity. How do you think we bring the productivity up by 20% next week to achieve our budget? That would be based on the fact that I suspect it would have been down. So definitely address those issues, but put it in a way that people are able to live with and that keeps them productive and engaged. Very important when they're working from home. And then with the team in the weekly meeting, review how everything's going and adjust what's happening. The morning meetings are a bit ordinary. Maybe we should only do it every second day, or maybe we can do something to beef it up a bit. So make sure we review that and get it and improve it. So that runs us through, I'll just flick back to here. That covers all of those. Send out the working doc first, have the discussion with your team, agree the working parameters, implement, review weekly and adjust. That delivers some certainty of leadership around this is how we're going to approach it, and this is what we're putting in place. And that's what people are looking for. So lastly, a couple of things to finish off with. Be more the coach and counsellor than the drill sergeant or the detective. Okay, so the coach or counsellor will get much better results from people, and it also allows that the team won't be expecting you to have all the answers when the next piece comes out from the government. It's absolutely fine to be saying, so from a certainty perspective, what we want to do is make sure we investigate that first before we give you how that impacts us as a business and you as an employee. So we'll come back to you tomorrow at 12 o'clock around that. That's the type of certainty we can deliver for people. Rather than the drill sergeant or detective who might go, well, we don't know, why would we know that? So it's important to do the coach counsellor type piece. And I'd like to finish with our friend Einstein, because where would we be without him? If you can't explain it simply, you don't know it well enough. So break everything down into simple so that it's easily understood by most of the people. In the middle of difficulty lies opportunity. A number of businesses have come up some really interesting opportunities of how they can do things differently, or where there might be opportunity in this crisis for them. A person who never made a mistake never tried anything new. So people will fall over in this new environment. Some will get distracted at home, some won't. I was talking to someone yesterday who thought she would really get distracted at home, and in fact, she's powering through. So I think, and cut yourself a break. Make sure you look after yourself in this environment, because you've got a lot of people talking with you about their problems and their family crisis. Try not to carry that load. You didn't create this situation. What we are doing is doing our best to make it as good as we can for our employees. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'll just see if there's any questions from Rob.
Thanks everyone, and thanks that you could join us today. There are a few questions that we'll take now for those that want to stay on and keep listening, but for those that have got to drop off, tomorrow we're dealing more with your banking relationship, and so independent of what bank you have, we'll look at how you can best approach your bank. We'll provide a bit of an economic update of how the market economists are seeing things, both globally but also with the stimulus. And then on Thursday, we have a session with the lawyers, just starting to talk about some of the contracts and documents and clauses and so forth, and also specifically a little bit around lease agreements and directors' responsibilities. So if you can join us for those same time tomorrow and the next day, and just register. But now we'll come back to some specific questions here. So one question is, if there's reduced hours or pay reductions have been implemented, what are some ways to keep the team motivated with the new adjustments?
Okay, so the first thing I would do is always ask the team. So if you want, from an engagement perspective, always ask the team what their ideas are, because they will have actually thought about it nearly more than you will have. So ask them what ideas you've got in terms of them, and I think they'd probably have some great ideas, but they're learning. there's lots of things on, you know, how can they be increasing their skill set, or maybe spending more time with the family, whatever it might be, if that's the type of thing we're talking about. So if they've reduced their hours and they can't, that they would have extra time, I would suggest maybe learning, obviously would be an obvious one, where there might be things they wanted to do for quite some time. This could be a good opportunity to do that. Maybe get their fitness up, and spend time with the family. The key thing we need to remember is that their whole family is impacted by this. So if they have extra time because their billable hours have been reduced, maybe they can offer to look after the children more, so the other person perhaps can keep their hours up. Hope that helps.
Thanks, Shirley. Well, you've obviously done a great job. Lots of comments coming through there saying thanks, great content, and so forth. And, you know, a lot of validation and things that, you know, people are trying to currently implement. So lots of appreciation. But that seems to be all of our questions today. So thanks, everyone, for joining us, and hopefully we'll connect again soon. Thanks very much, Shirley. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, everyone. Bye.